Hello. Welcome to Lecture 2 in Communication 1110. Let me say that, as mentioned before, you can find a transcript, a complete transcript of this in PDF form accompanying the materials in the class, and you can also find a PowerPoint. The PowerPoint will help you with any notes or lines you might have missed on the lecture guide, which I hope you have in front of you. And it also has some links and some humorous videos and things of that sort that you can look at as well. So I hope you'll take advantage of those resources as well as listening to this lecture and watching this lecture of me. All right, as I said, this is Lecture 2, and the title of this one is Public Speaking and History. Lectures 2, 3, 4, and 5 relate to Chapter 1 of the textbook. So you will want to be sure that you've read that in conjunction with these lectures that you're listening to. I'll be adding some extra information that will help you to see the big picture about rhetoric and public speaking and how it fits into your life. Today we're going to start by talking about the ancients, and by that I mean Plato, Aristotle, Quintilian, and Cicero, the main writers about rhetoric back in the classical period of time, which was 400 BC in Greece and about the time of Christ in Rome. Cicero and Quintilian were Romans. Plato and Aristotle were Greeks living relatively the same time. Plato was actually Aristotle's teacher, although they disagreed on a lot of matters philosophically. The ancients' view of communication focused on public speaking or persuasion, and the word they used for that, which is what goes in the blank, is rhetoric. That's spelled R-H-E-T-O-R-I-C. I know a lot of times you hear that word and it's used in sort of a negative sense, but it's not a negative word. Rhetoric means effective, persuasive writing or speaking. So that's what this class is about, being effective in your persuasion. So I want to talk a little bit about their view of public speaking and maybe contrast that some with our view. Public speaking is an art form since it started in about 400, 500 BC. It's an art form with long historical significance, and even though a lot of people don't agree with me, it is a skill that everyone can learn to some extent. Now, I'm not saying that you will be a speaker or an orator like Dr. Martin Luther King when you get out of my class, but everybody can learn the basics of public speaking and learn to defend and present his or her ideas in front of an audience in an effective way. For some people, it takes more time than others, but everybody can learn this. And if I didn't believe that, I would not be here. But to get more to the point, what is rhetoric and public speaking? It is a process of asking questions, and that involves research and analyzing your audience. It's a process of asking questions and answering questions in a structured, predetermined format. So that's the key of the way I teach the class. If this class had sort of a definition, thesis sentence, that's it right there. We're going to learn to answer the right question, to ask the right questions rather, and then to answer those questions in a structured, predetermined format for an audience. Now, let's talk a little bit more specifically about how the ancients, those folks in the classical period of Greece and Rome, felt about rhetoric. First of all, they saw it as essential to participating as a citizen in a free society, and this is extremely important. They did not view rhetoric as just something that helped them, that helped their own ego. They saw rhetoric as necessary to being a part of their city, their community, and participating as a free citizen. And we've sometimes gotten a little bit away from that. Back in the Greek democracy of Athens, in that period of time, if you were a citizen, you didn't get a choice to participate. You had to participate. You had to be someone who came to the meetings, was involved in the courts, and could defend and present your own ideas and critique the ideas of others. So it was necessary and essential to being a participating member of the society. Secondly, they saw it as dependent on two things. The first thing was that it was dependent on the character of the speaker. Quintilian said that rhetoric was the study of the good man speaking well. And when they said good man, they meant good citizen, a person who worked for the good of his community. And of course back then it was all men, but we could say her community today. Not just for his own good or her own good, but for the good of everyone. And as a little story, often in this class, if you meet in the traditional class, I have students brainstorm answers to questions. And one of the questions is, who are some speakers you would like to emulate? And by emulate, I mean they have characteristics that you would like to incorporate in your own communication. And invariably, I get one group that will list Jesus and Hitler. And I kind of laugh at them and I roll my eyes and I said, first of all, you have not heard either one of them speak publicly. You've seen video of Hitler, which was probably propaganda video, and you've read the words of Christ, but you really haven't heard them speak. And a student will say, well, Hitler was effective. And I said, well, yes, he got people to do what he wanted them to do, but by Quintilian's definition, he was not a good man speaking for the good of his community and speaking well. So, you know, when I talk about who you want to emulate, think of the people who contribute and what they've done well and how they've helped their community. Secondly, they saw it as dependent on knowledge of human nature and knowledge of human situations. And in this class, a lot of the things we do will seem like a psychology class, and that's as it should be, because as a public speaker, you need to understand people. You need to understand where they're coming from, to use that phrase, their goals, their motivations, their needs, beliefs, those kinds of things. So that is important to being a good public speaker. Thirdly, the ancients saw public speaking as based on the practice of asking key questions, which they called topoi. We get our word topics from that. They use the word commonplaces. Thankfully, we will only focus on a few key questions that a public speaker should ask about his audience and his situation or her situation. They had about 24 of them. Don't worry, we won't get that deeply into it. And in the next lecture, we'll talk about those key questions that a speaker should ask about his audience. So we've said that the ancients contributed many things, but one of the primary things that has come down to us from the ancients is what is called the canons of rhetoric. They contributed the idea of the 5 canons of rhetoric. Now that's C-A-N-O-N, not C-A-N-N-O-N. It doesn't have anything to do with bombs or cannonballs. It has to do with the laws, the 5 laws or rules of rhetoric. And I have a place for you to write these down. The first one is invention. When we think of invention, we think of an inventor who creates something. But the word invention actually means discovery. And so the definition of invention from a rhetorical standpoint is the invention of discovering what to say to this particular audience at this particular time for this particular purpose. If you didn't get that, go back and write it down because it's a very important definition. The discovery of what to say to this particular audience at this particular time for this particular purpose. And notice how very important it is that the content of your speech be focused on the situation, the audience, and the true purpose you're trying to achieve. A little story, I taught public speaking for years and then I got a degree in English and started teaching writing. And when I was teaching 1101 English, I was a little surprised at how, to be perfectly honest, boring the essays my students wrote. And I realized eventually that the reason for that was that in my public speaking class, they had 25, 30 people that they were responsible to be interesting. In the essays, they didn't see that they had an audience, and that's one of the problems with writing, is sometimes we don't see our audience. In public speaking, we really know our audience. They're staring right at us. So that's kind of a focus a little bit, I like to say, that you really in this class will have a group of people that you are responsible to be interesting and to think about them. The second canon of rhetoric is disposition, which is a fancy word for organization. And as you've probably figured out in this class, we will talk a great deal about the structure, the organization of your speech. The third is style. Don't worry, that doesn't have anything to do with clothing. It has to do with the language. Do you use very flowery, poetic language? Do you use very technical, precise language? Do you use very basic, everyday, sort of gut language? And different situations require different styles of language. In a eulogy, you might use more flowery language to describe someone, but in a technical meeting, you would use more technical language. So, and that refers to chapter 12 in the book. Then the next one is memory, which is not something we do nowadays. Memory had to do with the practice of memorizing famous speeches. Occasionally we do that now, and the idea was that it would help the student learn how to be a better speaker himself or herself. And number 5 is delivery, which of course is the nonverbal communication, the thing that is most obvious to people. When I ask people, what are some speaker behaviors that drive you nuts? Most of them have to do with delivery, monotone, lack of eye contact, things of that sort. Delivery is very important to us, and you will be graded on the delivery to some extent in your speeches. The last point on this lecture guide says, what is the importance of the 5 canons? Well, the importance is that today we still teach public speaking the same way by the same 5 canons. You'll notice this in your textbook. The beginning chapters are more about invention, then you move on to organization in the chapters on the introduction and conclusion and outlining, etc. Then you'll move on to the style, and then on to the delivery. And so even most textbooks today still follow that pattern. All right, thank you. That's the end of this lecture.